The ground in the southern Philippines just moved again, and if you've been paying attention to this region over the last couple of months, you already know this is not an isolated event. A magnitude 6.4 earthquake struck off the coast of Mindanao, rattling communities that are still, quite literally, standing on cracked foundations from a catastrophe that hit this same stretch of coastline only weeks earlier. No tsunami warning was issued this time, and early reports show no major new damage, but do not let that calm you down too quickly, because the scientists who study this region are not calling this the end of anything. They are calling it exactly what the data says it is, one more entry in a sequence that is still very much unfolding, and one that has every reason to keep producing dangerous aftershocks for months to come. In this video, I'm going to walk you through what actually happened, why this particular stretch of the Philippines is one of the most seismically loaded places on the planet, what the science of aftershock sequences tells us about what comes next, and why the honest answer to, "Is it over?" is almost certainly no. To understand why this new earthquake matters, you have to go back to June 8th, because everything happening right now sits directly in its shadow. On that morning, a magnitude 7.8 earthquake ruptured offshore southern Mindanao, near the town of Masim in Sarangani province. It remains one of the most destructive earthquakes to hit the Philippines in 5 decades. Officially, more than 100 people lost their lives. Well over 1,000 were injured, and entire neighborhoods across General Santos, Sarangani, and South Cotabato were flattened or badly damaged. More than 120,000 homes were destroyed or damaged. Landslides buried parts of towns. A tsunami followed the main shock, sending waves over a meter high into coastal communities, and in some spots, the coastline itself was physically lifted upward by nearly 2 meters and pushed out to sea by as much as 200 meters. Permanently changing the shoreline in a matter of seconds. This was not a small regional tremor. This was a genuine national disaster, and it happened along the Cotabato Trench, a subduction zone where oceanic crust is being forced down beneath the Philippines at a rate of roughly 10 centimeters a year, an astonishing pace by geological standards. Here's the part most people don't fully appreciate about an earthquake of this size. A magnitude 7.8 doesn't just happen and then go quiet. It fundamentally rearranges the stress sitting inside the Earth's crust across a huge area, and that rearranged stress has to go somewhere. In the 2 weeks immediately following the June 8th main shock, P-high Volks recorded more than 8,500 aftershocks. Read that number again, 8,500. That includes at least 2 separate magnitude 6.5 events, earthquakes that on their own, in any other week, would have been the lead story on every news channel in the country. And now, weeks later, we're seeing another significant event in the magnitude 6.4 range strike the same general region. This is not some bizarre new development. This is the main shock's aftershock sequence, still actively working through the enormous amount of stress that got redistributed back on June 8th, and it is behaving exactly the way seismologists would expect a sequence of this scale to behave. So let's actually talk about why scientists are comfortable saying, with real confidence, that this isn't over. Because this isn't fear-mongering, it's physics, and it comes down to 2 well-established statistical laws that seismologists use to describe aftershock behavior anywhere on Earth. The first is called Omori's law, and it tells us that aftershock frequency decays over time, but slowly, following a predictable curve rather than simply stopping. If you had thousands of aftershocks in the first 2 weeks, you should expect meaningfully fewer in the following weeks, and fewer still after that. But the tail of that curve stretches on for a long time, sometimes months, sometimes over a year, before activity finally settles back down to background levels. The second law, called Bath's law, tells us something even more specific and, frankly, more useful for understanding what just happened. Across earthquake sequences worldwide, the largest aftershock in a sequence tends to run about 1 to 1.5 magnitude units below the main shock. Do that math on a magnitude 7.8. That puts the statistically expected largest aftershock somewhere in the mid to high magnitude 6 range, which is almost exactly where we've now seen activity cluster, with those earlier 6.5 events and now this new 6.4. In other words, this earthquake isn't some rogue anomaly breaking the pattern. It is sitting almost precisely where the established science says a major aftershock from an event this size should sit. This matters enormously for a very practical reason that goes well beyond the numbers. An aftershock in the magnitude 6.4 range is a serious, damaging earthquake in its own right, one that would generate international headlines on a completely ordinary day. Now imagine that same earthquake striking a region where tens of thousands of homes are already cracked, weakened, or partially collapsed from the main shock 7 weeks earlier. Buildings that survived the initial 7.8 by the thinnest of margins, buildings that engineers have red-tagged as structurally compromised, are exactly the structures most vulnerable to being finished off by a moderate aftershock that a fully intact building would shrug off without issue. This is precisely why engineers and disaster response teams treat the aftershock phase of a major earthquake as its own ongoing emergency, separate from the initial disaster response, and precisely why reoccupying damaged buildings too early during an active aftershock sequence is one of the most dangerous mistakes communities can make after a major quake. There's also a deeper structural question hiding underneath all of this, and it's the one that should really hold your attention. The Cotabato Trench is not some isolated crack in the crust. It's part of a much larger and genuinely dangerous tectonic system running along the southern Philippines, where the Sunda Plate is being forced beneath the Philippine Mobile Belt. This exact same general boundary produced a magnitude 8.0 earthquake back in 1976 that killed roughly 8,000 people, one of the deadliest earthquakes in the country's modern history. The June 8th rupture this year tore through a specific segment of that boundary, but large fault systems are rarely one continuous uniform crack. They're built from multiple connected segments, and when one segment lets go, it very often increases the stress loading on the segments sitting right next door. Seismologists studying this event are doing exactly what their counterparts studied after other major subduction earthquakes around the world, mapping where the aftershocks are clustering, watching for activity that creeps outward toward neighboring fault segments rather than simply fading in place, and using satellite radar and GPS ground monitoring to measure how far the crust actually moved and which patches of the fault remain locked and still loaded with unreleased stress. None of this means anyone can tell you exactly when or where the next significant earthquake will strike, and any account that claims otherwise is not being honest with you. Nobody can predict the precise timing or location of a specific future earthquake, not here, not anywhere on the planet. What scientists can say, with real statistical backing, is that a region that just produced a magnitude 7.8 main shock and 8,500 aftershocks in 2 weeks is a region where the crust is still actively settling, and where additional moderate to strong aftershocks, quite possibly in this same magnitude 6 range, remain a live possibility for months to come. That is not speculation. It's the well-documented behavior of large earthquake sequences everywhere they've ever been studied. So what should you actually do with this information, especially if you live in Mindanao or anywhere along this stretch of the southern Philippines? First, treat any structure that has visible cracking, tilting, or damage from the June main shock as genuinely compromised, and follow local guidance on red-tagged buildings rather than assuming that surviving one earthquake means a building is safe from the next. Second, keep your emergency supplies accessible and your family's evacuation plan current, because an active aftershock sequence means preparedness isn't a one-time reaction to the main shock, it's an ongoing posture for as long as the sequence continues. Third, if you're near the coast and you feel strong, prolonged shaking, do not wait for an official tsunami alert before moving to higher ground, because in a region this close to the source, the earthquake itself is often the only warning you'll get before a wave arrives. And finally, understand that a below-average news cycle for this story doesn't mean the danger is past. Aftershock sequences fade gradually and unevenly, not in a single clean moment where everyone can exhale at once. Here's the honest bottom line. This magnitude 6.4 earthquake is not some new, disconnected disaster striking the Philippines out of nowhere. It is a textbook aftershock, arriving almost exactly where the established statistics of large earthquake sequences say it should, from a main shock that fundamentally altered the stress sitting in the crust beneath southern Mindanao. Scientists aren't fearing this because they're guessing or trying to alarm anyone. They're fearing it because the physics of aftershock decay tells us this sequence has real months left to run, and because neighboring fault segments along this same dangerous boundary are still being actively studied for exactly the kind of stress transfer that could produce the next significant event. This region does not need some rare, unprecedented alignment of bad luck to justify serious ongoing caution. It simply needs everyone living there and everyone watching from outside to understand what an active aftershock sequence actually means, and to stay prepared for as long as that sequence continues to unfold. If you found this breakdown useful, drop a comment and let me know if you're in the Philippines and whether you felt any of this recent shaking yourself. I say this every time, but I mean it more with this topic than almost any other I cover. Those first-hand reports genuinely help me understand what's actually happening on the ground, in real time, in ways that official updates and delayed reports sometimes can't capture. If you felt something and you're not sure if it was significant, say so anyway. If your area has been quiet while a neighboring province is dealing with repeated aftershocks, that contrast matters too. All of it helps build a clearer, more accurate picture for everyone watching this, not just me. If this video gave you clarity instead of just more panic, that was the entire goal, and it would help a lot if you tap that like button right now. Not for the algorithm's sake, but because it genuinely puts the grounded, fact-based version of this story in front of more people who might otherwise only be seeing rumors, exaggerated claims, or fear-driven posts spreading online. In a moment like this, calm and accurate information matters more than fast information, and every like helps push that version further. And subscribe with notifications turned on, because this aftershock sequence is nowhere near finished. Seismic activity like this doesn't resolve in a day or even a week, and there's a real chance we see continued movement in the coming days. I'll be tracking every significant new development as it happens, breaking down what it means, what officials are saying, and what you actually need to know versus what's just noise. If you want to stay informed without getting overwhelmed, this is the place to do that, together, one update at a time.